I'm excited to speak on behalf of families and children today. And as I do so, let me just say this. I know this bill has elicited a lot of passion on both sides of the aisle. And I've always felt like we all have this duty to represent our consciences and our constituents. Many people try to make this into an argument over the culture wars. That's not what it's about. This bill is about medical ethics. And I understand that many of us can look at the same facts and come to different conclusions. I know there are some colleagues of mine on this side of the aisle who struggle with it just a little bit. I've told them to vote their conscience. I know on the other side of the aisle, most people are going to disagree with me, and I want you to vote your conscience. Some of you, many of you are my friends, and you're still going to be my friends when this is all said and done. And I also know that there are some of you on this side of the aisle who actually agree with the bill. You've told me so. And I'm going to urge you to vote your conscience as well. Everyone should vote their conscience on this bill. And I appreciate you taking time now to allow me to explain why we have the SAFE Act and why we have safe women's sports. This bill came to me. I did not go to it. It all began with some families sitting across the table from me, telling me their stories with tears in their eyes, looking for someone who would help because they had been victimized by the results of these gender affirmation, so-called gender affirmation procedures. And they were looking for someone to help. And I could not say no to those families. And in the process of this bill, collaborating with many people, I've talked to a lot of people. And what I found amazing is the great diversity of support that came to this bill. I remember sitting at a dining room table in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the lady introduced herself to me as Anna. She gave testimony on this bill. Anna told me that she was in a same-sex relationship for 25 years, that she had a daughter who at one time identified as trans, and that her daughter wanted to go through the medical procedures. Anna said, you know, I'm very open-minded, obviously. She said, and I don't care what pronouns my daughter uses. I don't care how she dyes her hair, or what color she dyes it, or what clothes that she wears. But as a mother with a good conscience, I could not allow her to do medical harm, permanent damage to her body through puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, and surgery. And so she says, I said no to that. And I told her, when you get to be the age of, she said 24 or 25, which is much higher than what this bill will require. She said, you do your thing. And if you've thought it through and that's what you want to do, I will support you then, but not as a child. I remember speaking with Helena at a coffee shop down in Cincinnati. Helena had taken opposite sex hormones. She had taken testosterone, and she told me what it did to her body. She told me what it did to her mental health and how it devastated her. Throughout the course of this process, we met many other people who were affected by this. I think about Prisha, who came to our testimony and spoke, and she said that she likened the devastating effects of the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones to the same things that happen to people who experience female genital mutilation, which this body banned in the 132nd General Assembly. She said it's no different. I remember the first time I met Chloe Cole, someone had invited her to come and testify. I had never met her before. And she was shy, she was a little backwards, but she got up and she said that when she was young, when she was about 12 or so, I can't remember the exact age, but in that neighborhood, she said that she thought she was a boy. And the doctors affirmed that, and in fact, they used very manipulative language that is very common in this process. She's not the only one that says this. This is repeated again and again and again, is that the counselors told her parents, who were confused. They just wanted to do the right thing. And they said, if you do not support your son, and it's not her son, it was their daughter, if you don't support your son's belief that he's a boy when it's really a girl, he will commit suicide. And they ask that very common question that gets asked manipulatively of so many parents: do you want a living son or a dead daughter? Those are bad ethics. And she is not the only one. And she says, that's what she said, I'm listening to them tell my parents this, and I had never thought of suicide. But this is what they're telling my parents. She's not the only one. And we have had families right here in Ohio who have testified and have said they've heard the same experiences. There's another gentleman that I was introduced to by someone who is here today. I'll not point them out. I'll not call them out by name, because when I spoke to this gentleman on the phone, he told me his experiences of transitioning into a female at a very young age. And after he transitioned, he had a lot of regret. And he came back out of that. And he said that he just described the trauma that he faced through that process. And at first he wanted to testify on this bill, but then he saw how so many of the other people who call themselves detransitioners were treated. They are discriminated against more than anyone else in the LGBTQ community, because they are discriminated by people who discriminate to begin with. Then they're discriminated against those who identify as trans as well, because somehow it destroys their storyline. And they are brutalized in social media and everywhere else. They fear for their safety. And he said, you know what, I'm just getting my mental health back together. I don't want to relive that trauma. And you know, I respected that. I did not push him to testify. I did not push him to show up. But I guarantee you that he is here in Ohio recovering from the trauma of sex change. And so we have these people who have come and testified. In fact, Karina Khan, who identifies as a transsexual. I know some of you say that's not the proper terminology. You're supposed to say trans woman. Well, I asked Karina, and Karina says, well, actually, I'm not a woman, I'm a man, and that's how I identify myself, and I guess I'll let Karina decide how to identify when it comes to that. Karina actually wrote an op-ed that went into the Washington Post that said, what I wish I knew before I had sex reassignment surgery. Karina did this at a young age, but it was not as a minor. But nevertheless, the truth holds throughout this process. And Karina said that she always said, I always wanted to live a good long life. She said this in testimony last year. However, now I know that's not possible because my doctors lied to me. Karina came back and testified once again this year. Karina is a member of the Gender Care Consumer Action Network. I think I said that properly. And so what I was really amazed with, what I have been very amazed with, is the diverse coalition of people who have supported this bill. Support from this bill has come from gays, lesbians, trans folks, as well as atheists. I can tell you about Jeanette, who came, and some of you saw billboards that might have gone up. I didn't even know they were going up. Jeanette was responsible for that in her organization called Partners for Ethical Care, and Jeanette is an atheist. She says she doesn't believe in God. Well, I beg to differ with her, but we don't go down that road. The fact is that people of all religions, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Jews, Hindus, have come alongside of us and said, we support what you are doing, RepClick. In fact, I get emails frequently. In fact, I got an email just yesterday from a gentleman who said, I have a gay background. I support what you're doing. Thank you. Don't let up. Keep doing this. And so we've received all kinds of support from people on both sides of the aisle and of all diverse backgrounds. Why? Because this is an issue not about a culture war, as both people on the left and right want to call it sometimes. We are talking about medical ethics. We know that children cannot provide informed consent. They don't have that capability. When you put a child on puberty blockers is the core of this bill. It is the puberty blockers that is the most dangerous aspect of what is happening in the sex changes for children. Because first of all, if you look at the WPATH standards of care, they tell us right up front that only 6% of children who have gender dysphoria, and by the way, every child with gender dysphoria should be loved, respected, treated with kindness, care, and compassion. Only 6% of them will persist after puberty, according to WPATH. When you take a look at all of the studies, it's between 85 to 95% of kids will desist. Puberty is the natural remedy for this mental health condition. It is listed in the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders. And psychotherapy, talk therapy, watchful waiting. You don't persecute these kids. You don't treat them ill. You don't treat them bad. You don't put them in so-called conversion therapy. You give them time to figure it out in a loving and a caring environment, and they do. However, although 85 to 95% will desist, as soon as you put them on puberty blockers, that number reverses dramatically. 98% of those children who are put on puberty blockers will persist into opposite sex hormones and ultimately to surgical interventions. Now let me tell you the dangers of the puberty blockers. This is not a neutral intervention. You literally shift the decision of 88 out of 100 kids from desisting, and by the way, there are desisters, there are those who transition, and then there are those who detransition. There's really three categories, and we actually have some desisters in here today, and I'm not going to point them out or call them out, but folks who identified as the opposite sex for a time in their youth, they outgrew that, and they went on to live lives free from a lifetime of medicalization. But when you put them on puberty blockers, first of all, you arrest brain development. Puberty isn't just about your secondary sex characteristics. You arrest brain development. You create genital atrophy in these kids. You increase the risk for cardiovascular disease. You increase the risk for stroke. You increase the risk for osteopenia and osteoporosis. You are literally setting their endocrine system at war with their DNA when you don't have to. You don't have to. And all of this stuff comes because we put them on puberty blockers, then they proceed to opposite sex hormones, then ultimately to surgery. Now, at first we were told by the hospitals, we're not doing surgeries. And I'm not going to argue whether they're doing surgeries or not. Some people insist that they are. I have not accused the hospitals of doing surgeries, but they have been, how should I word this? Advising, because they don't like, they've denied that they were making referrals, but when push came to shove in our committee, this is what they said. They said, well, we may tell them somewhere else where they can have those procedures done. But they didn't want to call that a referral. Well, you call it whatever you want to. They're pointing them to places where this is actually occurring in Ohio. We have proved that it's occurring in Ohio. I have two recordings that were included in my notes and my frequently asked questions, where there are clinics in Ohio that say that they will do this as young as 16. After even one visit with a counselor, they have to go to see a counselor. They said some counselors will give it to you in one visit. We don't recommend that. We think they should have at least 3 visits. But those 3 visits could be accomplished in a month. And within a month, they could go in and get a double mastectomy, remove healthy body tissue. Chloe Cole was one of those who's talked about this. So is Precia, and there are many others. And by the time, with Chloe's, I started to tell her story. By the time she was 17, she said, what did the adults in my life actually let me do? And it's a shame what was allowed to happen to her. It's happening to girls right here in Ohio. And it is a shame that we would do that to our minors who cannot provide informed consent. As you can see, I laid my notes down because I got a little passionate there. And I want you to understand this, that not only are the surgeries happening, but when we talk about the opposition to this bill, the opposition comes from a place of imminence rather than evidence. What does that mean? Imminence is authority. It's really because we said so, not because it is so. So you'll hear my friends and my colleagues over here talk about all the different associations who recommend this, who say it's good. But they just tell you this association, that association. We asked for the science. They could not provide the science. They did not provide the science. Any studies that they have are short-term studies because that's all they have. We've been doing this for less than a decade in Ohio.
Representative, you're 15 minutes. If you could please finish in a few seconds.
Yes, sir. And so we need to, that 15 minutes sure went fast, sir. Not for everyone. I heard that. I heard that. So the evidence and the science is on our side. I will just say that. And let me just, and I'll save room because I understand someone else is going to speak on Save Women's Sports, so I'll just leave that for them. But just let me say this is, I want everyone to vote your conscience and your constituents. If you disagree with this bill, vote that way. You're not going to hurt my feelings. You're not going to make me upset. But if you agree with this bill, follow your conscience.
Thank you,
follow your constituents and vote that way. I urge a yes vote on Substitute House Bill 68.